David Brewster here with another Three for All, and this is three blues licks from the Three Kings. And of course, we're going to be talking about Albert King, B.B. King, and Freddie King. You know, three of the most popular and influential, blues guitarists of all time. And their influence can be heard in blues, but you can also hear it in rock too, because these three players, directly influenced lots of famous rock guitarists. Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page. I mean, you name it. All those British, blues rock giants were directly influenced by these three, just marvelous blues guitarists. And I'm a big, Albert King and B.B. King fan. I'm also a huge Freddie King. I think if I had to choose between the three, I'm really a big Freddie King fan. I love Albert and B.B. But Freddie is just a little, he was about 10 years younger than the other two. Albert and B.B. were very, similar in age. But then Freddie was about a decade younger, and he just had this kind of rockin' fire. Listen to Going Down and some of those songs. I'm Going Down is a rock song. It's a blues tune, but there's so much energy and emotion. I'm a huge Freddie King fan. If you're a fan of these three guitarists, then you know what's coming. There's going to be some great blues licks, string bending, vibrato, very controlled, and, just dynamic playing from all three of these players. But then if you're not really hip to the Three Kings, then, prepare yourself, because we're definitely going to toughen up, the calluses on your fingertips, a lot of string bending, especially Albert King. It seems like Albert King tends to chew up my fingertips more than just about any guitarist. David Gilmour, Jeff Beck, some of those players. But then when I sit down and start playing some Albert King licks or songs, Crosscut Saw or some of those tunes, it really does chew up my fingers. He does a lot of index finger bending, which is really hard. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to reveal a few secrets, surrounding Albert King and B.B. King. And then we're going to relate that to Freddie, because Freddie kind of took the best of both worlds, from Albert and B.B., and then mixed in some of his own ideas too. So there's a lot of cool ideas floating around in this lesson. Yeah, to keep things fair, I decided to go alphabetically, just so that way I'm not playing favorites, from one king to another. So we're going to start with Albert, and then move to BB, and then end up with Freddie. But with Albert King, there's a lot, that you have to kind of absorb or understand. Left-handed player, normally played a flying V, left-handed, but he didn't restring it, like Hendrix. Hendrix played left-handed, but he restrung the guitar. But Albert just literally took a right-handed guitar and played it left-handed without restringing anything. So there's a number of things you can pick up from this guy. Definitely Albert King was a direct influence on Stevie Ray Vaughan, one of Stevie Ray's biggest influences. So if you like Albert King, obviously you're probably a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. If you're a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, then you're definitely an Albert King fan, because it's very similar. And Stevie, definitely respected Albert big time. A lot of his phrasing and licks and ideas came directly from Albert. But with the flying V flipped, left-handed without being restrung, you'll catch Albert playing, string bending on the top strings, the B and the high E. But he's not pushing up toward the ceiling. Keep in mind, he's playing it this way upside down. So he's pulling, he's pulling down on those strings instead of pushing them up. So that does give him a little bit of leverage in a different way, especially with his index finger, being able to kind of smear that note downward instead of pushing, the string upward. But one big thing in Albert King's kind of blues universe is the Albert King box. And this is a concept that he used throughout his career. Hendrix borrowed it, Stevie Ray Vaughan, there's a whole bunch of people that have borrowed it. Okay, so the first lick that we're going to look at is in the key of G. So we're going to put this, Albert King box in the key of G so you can see where it came from. So think of G7. There's the, G minor pentatonic right there. And then right above that, if you think of that as position 1 of minor pentatonic, think of position 2, which is right here. And then right there at the top of that position, right here, so think, right above the box, there's this little 5-note spread, and this is known as the Albert King box. It's technically, just a legit form of the pentatonic scale right here. But Albert loved soloing out of that little pattern of notes, and then he would slip back into the box and then go right back to this little fragment of a box right there. So you can see there's really just 5 notes, and it's all 5 notes of G minor pentatonic. There's D, there's F, there's G, there's B flat, and there's C. So those are the 5 notes we need for G minor pentatonic. But it's all conveniently in this little, area on the fretboard right there. So keep in mind your root is right there, on the 8th fret on the B string. And Albert would target, any of those notes, bending, vibrato, either, stiff bending, like maybe going up a whole step or higher, or just little slight bends, a half step or a quarter step. But here's an image with that, fingering on the fretboard, so you can really pinpoint what I'm talking about, where I'm playing right there. For Albert's lick, it's in G7, and the footage came, I think it's from Europe in like the early 70s. I'm not really sure the details, surrounding the footage I found. But he's playing this really bouncy, blues phrasing during this lick. It's something like this. More time. And it's a very tight and demanding and kind of spastic lick, but it's pretty much all built right out of that little Albert King, box, his favorite area right there. So he's grabbing this D and then heading over to that G note. And then you're going to grab the C and bend that up a whole step to D. And then do it twice more. And after you bend that twice, you're going to come back to that B flat, grab that G, and there's a double stop there on the 6th fret. And then basically grab that D and G again. And then right here, he's technically bending, B flat up a whole step to C. And keep in mind, he's playing a flying V upside down. So he's bending, and pulling that string toward the floor with his index finger. Now you can definitely try this bend with your index finger, but that's hard. That hurt a little bit, just getting that note up a whole step. So what I did earlier is I snuck back with my middle finger and kind of reinforced that bend, because technically that first part of the riff is over G, this part. And then right when he targets this bend, the chord actually changes to C. So you need to make sure when you're bending that B flat, you're getting right to the pitch, because you're basically playing the root of the chord that changed. That C. So just to make it a little bit easier, and so you don't chew up your index finger, don't feel bad about reinforcing that bend, because keep in mind, Albert's pulling, toward the floor, and you're pushing, toward the ceiling if you're strung up and playing, like this. So that's okay to kind of sneak back there and help out, your fingers with that bend. So after you release that bend, then he does this, B flat to C, and then he gradually bends that C up. And it's like, he frets it normal, and then like a quarter step, and then a half step, and then a whole step. Very expressive lick for sure. But here's the footage with Albert playing that lick. It's just ferocious. Right up next we have the late great, B.B. King. Of course, all 3 of these guitarists are late great, blues legends. But B.B. King definitely, huge influence on blues guitarists, rock guitarists, just music fans, all over the world. And I know for me, when I was younger, when I was a little boy or a kid or whatever, a preteen and then a teenager, I had no idea who Albert King or Freddie King were, but I knew B.B. King. He was on TV. I think he was on Sesame Street or something. I remember seeing him on television, hearing his music. Of course, I'm from Chicago. There's a huge history of blues in that city. So just the whole thing, my whole life, I think I definitely a rocker, and I listen to metal. I love classical and jazz and funk, but I love blues, and it's probably just in my blood or whatever. So there's something about BB, it's very expressive, very emotive. There's this energy, there's this kind of primal, sound, because he wasn't a flashy showman. He just played what he felt and what the song, kind of demanded. And there is, kind of a secret box for B.B. King, and we're going to break that down. I actually did have a lesson with Premier Guitar. Was that like 6 years ago now? But I did have a lesson with Premier Guitar where I broke down the B.B. King box, and you can still find that on their website. Okay, so for BB's lick that we're going to look at, it's in C or C7. So we're going to change keys, from where we were with Albert. Albert was in G. Now with BB, we're going to be in the key of C. So think of C7. And definitely, BB would use, the minor pentatonic box. But he had a secret weapon, the B.B. King box. And the easiest way to find it, is declare what key you're going to be in. I just declared the key of C right there. And then along the B string, you want to put your index finger on the root. All right, so we can find C right there. And definitely BB, would occasionally play, close to open position, but more often than not, this was BB King's territory, through here. He would kind of stretch back and get back into lower positions, but more often than not, you would find him up here somewhere. So let's not worry about this position. Let's just go ahead and target this higher position right here. So there's your root, C, right? And then he had his own little mutation, box like this. And immediately it sounds like B.B. King. I didn't even really play a lick. That's just his box or the scale. So you can see there's, the sixth, that A we're starting with, and then the root C. There's the second, that D note, the flat 3, or the minor third, which is E flat, the fourth, which is that F, and the fifth, which is that G. And sometimes he would even sneak in, this F sharp or G flat. Kind of a chromatic note there. So that's not minor pentatonic. It's kind of bending away from the minor pentatonic scale. But that, B.B. King box sounds amazing when you mix it with the minor pentatonic. So if you're playing over the one chord, which is C, it sounds great. Even though there's a minor third right there. And I'm thinking C7. So you could definitely bend that a half step up to E. But BB would just play it, against that 7 chord. And I also watched an interview with B.B. King where he was breaking down some of his style, and he admitted he uses really heavy picks, which I do too. And he picked almost exclusively with downstrokes. Occasionally he would put an upstroke in there, but he accented everything sharply with a heavy pick, downstroke picking, and like I said, occasionally he would sneak in an upstroke. But to play that scale authentically, just pick everything down. And you have that very kind of sharp attack, And that's a really interesting scale to use, especially over a blues. It sounds great over the one chord, but it also sounds really good over the 4 chord, which in this case would be F, or F And it sounds so sweet to go back into the minor pentatonic after you play it out of that box. And you can catch tons of players, kind of borrowing or stealing that. Jimmy Page, Stevie Ray Vaughan, there's a ton of players. Jimi Hendrix. Billy Gibbons, for sure. Billy Gibbons is a huge B.B. King fan. But anyway, here's an image with that, B.B. King box, on the fretboard, so you can see exactly where we are and what we're doing there. Okay, now for BB's lick, it actually starts over F7, over the 4 chord, and then resolves, to the 1 chord. And it comes right out of his box right there, like this. One more time. So right there you can see we're starting, with this E flat, and he's bending that up. It's a whole step, but he almost goes past the whole step in the beginning. And then he does this little phrase, which is right out of his box right there. And then grab this G, you're going to bend that up technically a step and a half, bring it back, and then bend it up again. That's tough. Definitely chew up your 3rd finger a little bit, like the calluses there, because that's a big, hefty bend, a step and a half. And you're going to basically grab that F and C, grab that E flat, bend it up again. And then end with A to D, and then bend that D up a whole step. So you're basically ending, bending up to that E note. But here's the clip with BB playing that, just the signature BB King phrase. Next up is Freddie King, and Freddie King didn't really have his own, signature or, namesake box, but being, about a decade younger than Albert and BB, Freddie kind of mined and borrowed, some of BB's ideas, Albert King's ideas, and tons of other blues guitarists too, not just those two. T-Bone Walker, Chuck Berry, there's a whole bunch of people that Freddie listened to and borrowed ideas from. So while he doesn't have his own box, he really is one of my favorite blues guitarists. And there's a bunch of blues guitarists. I love Buddy Guy. I love Albert Collins. There's a bunch of players I love. But there's just something about Freddie. He has this fire, or had this fire, when he played, when he sang, this energy. Even on stage, with live footage, he was constantly smiling, projecting this very positive, mood and sound. Even though some of his songs are very, sad and, minor keys or whatever, it's blues. For Freddie's lick, it's actually in the key of E, but it's going to start on the 4 chord, which is A7, and then it's going to move back to the 1 chord, which is E7. And it's this bouncy, playful lick. Really cool. Something like this. One more time. Really cool. So it starts over A7, and he's kind of playing out of B.B. King's box a little bit right there. If you were thinking of E7, he's starting his phrase basically kind of chasing some of that, B.B. King box we just looked at. But it starts like this. One more time. And then you want to start that phrase again. And then you're basically just going to pull off this G to the open B. So there's 2 pull-offs right there. Like that. And then you're going to move back to open open position, grab A, play the open G, and then you're basically playing a turnaround here. So when you hit that, you want to grab that G sharp, and then you're going to slide into this B and the G sharp up on the high E string. Keep in mind also Freddie used a thumb pick and a finger pick, so he was kind of finger plucking, you know, his licks. And I think the thumb pick was plastic, and the finger pick on his index finger was metal, like a banjo pick. So that's how he got those really bright and, you know, piercing sounds for sure. So right there, you're basically grabbing, you know, the A, the open G, hammer on G sharp, and then slide to B, and then you're going to come down those sixths like that. And then you're going to trill that G sharp. Grab the high E string open again, or open, and then slide again like that. And then basically mimic that phrase. And then just hammer on to that G sharp with the high E string open. So one more time. You know, really tasty phrase, but here's Freddie playing that. Here's a bonus lick, and this was really hard to decide, okay, am I going to show an extra Albert King lick? Am I going to show an extra B.B. King lick? Or Freddie King? And I already admitted that I'm a huge Freddie King fan, so of course I chose Freddie. Sorry, I didn't mean to, I don't want to upset anybody, Albert King or B.B. King fans out there. I love B.B. and Albert, but I really do have the soft spot for Freddie, where it's just like, yeah, I just love, you know, his style, his personality, his playing and everything. And this lick is, I mean, it's obviously a blues lick because Freddie King was a blues guitarist, but it sounds like rock. You know, it's got a little bit of grit on it. It's phrased and a lot of bending, but you can hear licks like this in rock guitar solos, you know, and it's like, gosh, Freddie had such an influence. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I mean, Albert King and B.B. King were definitely very influential, you know, obviously for blues guitarists, and they were also influential for rock guitarists, but Freddie King, I mean, definitely influenced blues players, but he directly put fire and energy into a lot of young rock guitarists, you know, ears and minds and their playing. So I think Freddie's overlooked and underappreciated in that aspect, you know, in the rock blues, you know, kind of trade-off or whatever. But anyway, this lick, one more time. You know, and there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of expression and emotion in those bends, you know, and he's picking hard, he's digging in, and it's really, really cool. So right here, you know, really interesting phrase for sure. So it actually starts over F sharp 7, and then it's going to end on the 1 chord, which is C sharp 7. So we're in definitely a different key. You're going to hear that kind of resolution. But with that lick, it's basically starting on the 4 chord, and we're in C sharp 7, technically, and that's the 4 chord is going to be F sharp 7. So we're in a noticeably different key than the previous examples. But think of, you know, that tonality. So we're starting on F sharp 7, and then move to C sharp 7. And it's real funky too in the background. But that lick, you know, just really tight phrasing, and it's melodic and musical, but it sits really well over the chord progression too. You know, I just love that phrase. So he's basically grabbing that G sharp and bending the heck out of it. And then come down chromatically. You know, there's, you know, G sharp, G to F sharp. And there you're kind of playing between that E and that F sharp. grab that C sharp, you're going to head back over to that E. And this is where that really expressive, you know, kind of slight bending and phrasing comes in. And you can definitely hear it there right at the end. You know, the way he's kind of smearing those notes around. So cool. But here's Freddie blazing that back in the early 70s. That's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with 3 blues licks from the 3 Kings. And there's a ton, you know, a mountain of information you can learn from Albert King, B.B. King, and Freddie King. Licks, phrases, little tricks, and, you know, just little subtle things that all 3 of those players did that you can kind of add to your playing and your phrasing and your bag of tricks. And it's very musical. It catches attention, you know, listeners' attention or an audience's attention. And, I don't know, it's kind of a lost art. I mean, there's still tons of blues guitarists out there that are still kind of refining and reworking, you know, some of these ideas. But I always like to go back to the source. You know, I mean, it's okay to listen to somebody that was influenced by one of these 3. But if you're going to do that, why not just go ahead and go back to Albert King, B.B. King, or Freddie King and get it from the actual source, you know, and then you can compare it. You know, like you could take Albert King licks and compare it to Stevie Ray Vaughan licks, and you'll see the similarities. You know, I mean, I think historically, Stevie Ray Vaughan, when he did the David Bowie session, you know, for Let's Dance and all that stuff, he was kind of stumped because he thought, this is a pop album. You know, I'm not a pop guitar player. He didn't know what to do. But I guess he heard the tracks, and then he just kept telling himself, just play like Albert King. You know, what would Albert King do? And that's, you know, if you listen to those songs that he recorded with David Bowie, it sounds like Albert King. You know, he's playing Albert King licks and phrasing. And I always thought that was so interesting that there's David Bowie trying to push, you know, 80s, you know, kind of melodic pop or whatever you wanted to call, you know, that phase of Bowie's career. But, you know, the keyboards, the synth, the kind of pop sound. And then there's Stevie Ray Vaughan playing these old 50s and 60s, you know, Albert King licks over it, which I always thought that was so interesting. Like, wow, those 2 worlds really shouldn't go together, but it fits, you know, and it worked. But anyway, I'm ranting. So definitely check out Albert King, B.B. King, and Freddie King if you want to beef up your bending and vibrato chops, you know, if you want to strengthen and kind of toughen up those calluses on your fingertips. And just, you know, playing over chords and blues progressions, phrasing, you know, melodically and musically, and very expressive, you know, bending, vibrato, rake, you know, bending, and all these little things that you can hear from all 3 of these great guitarists. And anyway, definitely had a blast putting this together. I'm going to start kind of putting out some more blues influenced lessons and material on the channel here. So hang on, we're going to get kind of crazy here in the next few months. But anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Midnight Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.